What if someone had said, "I'll never be able to do it"?
What if I was too afraid to use my voice?
And what if we were shut out?
Epilepsy is no cause to discriminate. It's a motivation to realize potential.
Some people used to tease me, but they don't do that anymore, because they kind of get, oh, well, if he has seizures, what if I had them? I wouldn't like it.
There's no need to bully them or say silly comments about them, because they're the same as us, and it's just having a seizure and they can't help that. So it would help if you wouldn't bully them, because it would make their life better.
Yes, there really should not be any reason why people with epilepsy should be stigmatized, especially that this is an old and fairly common condition that affects people of all ages. Now, the earliest descriptions of epileptic seizures date back more than 3,000 years ago, and this condition is estimated to affect about 2% of the world's population. So how much and what should you know about this condition? Is it curable? Can people living with epilepsy play sport, drive cars, get employed? Can children with epilepsy cope well at school? Do they get brain damage from the seizures? How would you know if someone is having an epileptic seizure? And if it does happen in front of you, what would you do? Well, stay tuned, because today we unpack all you need to know about epilepsy. And to help us with this, we have an expert panel comprised of a professor in neurology from Wits University, a social worker and assistant director at Epilepsy South Africa, and a person living with epilepsy to share her personal journey with the condition. Just a note that some visuals might upset sensitive viewers, but sit back, relax, and learn from this exciting show ahead. You can be part of the show, as always, by calling us with your questions or views on Johannesburg 714-6843, 6847, 6857, or simply interact with us on our Facebook page and on Twitter. I'm Dr. Sello Mutau, and this is Health Talk.
Across the world, over 50 million people suffer from a medical condition that is too often misunderstood. Some people believe that it is contagious, or that those who have it are mad and should be hidden away, or even that they are possessed by evil spirits.
Seizures may occur when the normal functions of the brain are compromised by injury, illness, poison, disease, fever, lack of oxygen, or infection. Approximately 1 in 20 children under the age of 6 will have a seizure. These are caused by a high temperature associated with illness.
Mum, I think it's happening again.
All right, that's okay. Let's get you to the ground. Just straight down to the ground.
Seizures are also caused by a chronic condition known as epilepsy.
So what is epilepsy?
Epilepsy is a condition of recurrent seizures. A seizure is a sudden, excessive discharge of electrical activity in the nervous system that causes a change in behavior, movement, sensation, or consciousness.
Help me in case he falls.
I'm holding the table up.
I don't know.
I don't know.
People with epilepsy should not be called epileptics, as this term defines someone by one trait only. It is better to use the term a person with epilepsy. To many, the term seizure disorder is also synonymous with epilepsy. Another truth about epilepsy is that people with the condition are seldom brain damaged. While brain function can be temporarily disturbed by seizures, brain damage, or a permanent problem with the brain structure, is not synonymous with epilepsy. Like any other group, people with epilepsy have different intellectual abilities. Some are brilliant, while others have problems with basic cognitive functioning. For the most part, though, people with epilepsy have normal intelligence. Although seizures can be confusing and are often misconstrued as violent or challenging behavior, people with epilepsy have no greater tendency towards violence or aggression than do others. Despite ancient falsehood that put epilepsy in the same class as mental illness, one has nothing to do with the other. Single seizures that last less than 10 minutes are not known to cause brain damage or injury in the long term. While there may be a cumulative effect from frequent seizures, this appears to be rare. Another fact about epilepsy is that the condition is not usually inherited. While some types of epilepsy are passed on through family, the majority of cases have unknown or environmental causes. Most people who develop epilepsy have seizures and require medication for only a small portion of their lives. In fact, about 60% of people with epilepsy find that it goes away with treatment. Witch hunting in the 1490s focused on finding people with seizures, and even the Bible declares that epilepsy is caused by an internal devil. Contrary to these stigmas, however, epilepsy is a medical problem, nothing more. Perhaps the most liberating truth surrounding epilepsy is that it is perfectly compatible with a normal, happy life. A positive outlook, a supportive environment, and good medical care usually make it possible to live fruitfully with epilepsy.
Right. Now, to help us understand a lot more about epilepsy, welcome Professor Girish Modi. Now, Professor Modi is a specialist neurologist and head of the Neurology Department at Wits University. Welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you.
Right. Perhaps before we get into technical discussions and about epilepsy and what have you, let's just deal with these terminology issues. What's the difference between seizures, convulsions, fits, and so on?
Yeah. So they're all one and the same. A seizure basically is so epilepsy is like an electrical storm. Okay. So what happens is that you get a trigger, a focus somewhere in your brain. If it's in the center of your brain, which we call the brain stem, it'll discharge spontaneously through whatever mechanism that we will discuss, some of the triggers, and shoot up like a storm going up a tree.
Right.
Cover the entire brain with this within seconds, and that's a seizure. That will result in a physical activity in your body, which means you either become limp, you either become stiff, you either jerk, you either become tight and tense, or you just blank out.
Okay.
Right? So that phenomenon, the electrical discharge in your brain, like a shock, like a train, like a storm of energy that goes through your brain, switches it off. And that switch off is a seizure. So the lay term for that is a fit. The reason it became a fit is because people saw someone falling down, getting stiff and jerking, and so they called it a fit. Convulsion, again, because you're jerking. So it's one and the same. So a fit, a convulsion, a seizure, three different words, same meaning.
Could it be that your brain is seized for a moment?
For a moment, seizure.
All right.
That's where the word comes from.
Okay. Now, we believe that there's different types of epilepsy, and I don't want us to get too technical.
Not to get too technical, but clinically and from the bedside, you need to know two important things. One is there are generalized seizures, and two, there are partial seizures.
Right.
The key difference is what matters, not the different types.
Yeah.
Right? In the first one, in the generalized, you lose consciousness from the word go. So there's no warning, no aura as we call it. You have no idea it's going to happen. You're walking, you're sitting, you're talking, bang, you're gone. In the partial ones, there's always a warning. So before you lose consciousness, or before you have partial loss of consciousness, something tells you. A bad smell, a feeling in the stomach, taste sensation, or you see something. So those are the key differences.
Could it have anything to do with where the focal area is?
Yeah. So in the generalized, there is no focal area. It comes from that brain stem that I'm talking of. In the partial, the focus could be in your frontal lobe, your temporal lobe, which is a common site because there's something to do with birth-related development there. Very rarely we even see it with people in the visual cortex, and so they can even present with visual symptoms.
Right.
As the aura. Okay. So that's the key thing. Then in terms of what can happen to you, the seizures vary from the one extreme that you saw in the clip earlier, where the chap falls down, he's stiff, he's jerking. So that's the violent seizure that frightens us all. I mean, I've had people sitting in my rooms having that, and the others go into a state of shock. I mean, it traumatizes people to see that. It's so frightening. To the very benign form, where you get the child with what we call absence or petit mal, and he looks at you, blink, blink, and he's gone. And then he's back. 3 seconds.
You mentioned something else now, petit mal. It reminds me of, grand mal, petit mal.
So those were the terms.
Do they still use those?
We still use that. We don't like the term because mal sort of associates with madness, and so we've dumped those terms. It's like the clip said, never use the word term epileptic. It's a stigma. Right? It's like saying diabetic. It's not a good word. Those are not PC
and
anymore.
Unfortunately, medical professionals
we do that. But it's a person with epilepsy. And so grand mal came from big madness and petit mal from small madness. But it's not a term that we like using anymore. So we use the generalized, partial, and then we talk of absences.
Okay. Now, in terms of prevalence, how common is this epilepsy in general in South Africa?
They say
and is there a difference in the types?
Statistics are that there are 65 million sufferers of epilepsy.
Around the world.
Right? If you take that, the largest percentage is the generalized. So about 70 to 80% of those have generalized epilepsy. The partial forms are less common, less frequent, but they are the more severe ones. They are the ones where we have treatment issues. The generalized forms, we don't have that many treatment issues. We can literally, like they said, cure them in inverted commas with 2 years of treatment.
Okay. And in South Africa?
In South Africa, the prevalence is similar. I mean, we're looking at 0.5 to 1.5% of the population. Statistics are difficult because we don't have accurate figures from the rural areas. But some of the mechanisms in Africa and in the third so-called developing nations are different. And so one always looks at infections in these areas as a huge factor.
Okay. Well, talk about infections, and maybe just before you get to infections, we want to understand what are the causes and so on. Prevalence in terms of age now, is it more common in the young? Are there any differences?
I mean, the commonest age group is 5 to 15. Right? There's a small group between 0 and 5 that has development-related epilepsy. Those are quite bad. Some of them are really bad. Then at about 5, the simple epilepsies come in, like the generalized epilepsies. And that goes on till about 15, where you see the myoclonic, what we call the juvenile epilepsies. And then you go into the adult group, and that's where the secondary causes become important. There's one important issue that people always ask, why did I get my epilepsy at 5 and he got it at 15? Right? So the belief is as follows, and this is an important thing, and I'll just elaborate quickly, that you are born at birth, you develop a risk. That risk may be related to development, the way you were formed, genetics, or whatever, birth-related issues. You carry that risk through the rest of your life, but you need a specific trigger to trigger off your epilepsy. So if that trigger is a fever at age 5, or a head injury during rugby at age 12, or a stroke at age 50, that'll be your trigger. So that dictates largely what age you will get your epilepsy.
But that risk, I mean, is it necessarily genetic?
No. I said it could be developmental. It could be related to birth injuries. For instance, delayed labor, using forceps, vacuum, whatever. Some kind of trauma. It could be related to an infection at birth. Or it could be a genetic factor.
All right. We just need to go for a short break, but I'd like us to continue along the lines of understanding the triggers and some of the causes, but obviously we're going to focus a lot more in children. Okay, so after the break, we'll learn more about epilepsy and non-epileptic seizures in children. Please stay with us.
Oscar Minor produces abstract and symbolic works of art. He called his latest collection Vote with Ink, Not Blood.
Praying for peace, literally, in my own way.
The South African film titled Luister or Listen in Afrikaans tackles issues of race in the country.
I think that the end goal is the reformation of institutional culture, but how we get there is in fact through changing the language policy so that no student is forced to learn in Afrikaans.
It's fashion designers like Julia Mpoko who are starting to pay more attention to menswear and hope to make a mark in the fashion industry.
So regardless of whether you're African, European, there's certain styles that you like. So if an African man enjoys wearing simple, well-tailored pants, then yes, I guess.
Join Refulo Mula for that 1 hour weekly dose of arts and entertainment news every Friday at 9 p.m. on Trends.
I found out that I had epilepsy in grade 4 when I was in primary school. I have seizures that I can't see and sometimes things move around me.
My eyes roll backwards so they go white and my tongue folds and I shake.
When I have a seizure, I just go to sleep and just don't know what's happening. I just have a little snoozy. My body and brain gets tired, so I have to have some rest time.
You having one, bud? You having one? Right here. Here, come here. Ready? Put your head up. Don't drool on me. Don't drool on me. Let's count it. Here. Take your helmet off real quick. Here. You okay? Ready to count? How many eyes do I have? How many eyes do I have?
0.
0. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Count with me. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. You're all right. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. 19, 20, 21, 22, 20. What's up? Finished?
22.
How many?
22.
22? And you didn't even slobber.
I can hear and I can touch and I can react if somebody pinches me or does anything. I can interact with other people. I can do normal things.
Epilepsy doesn't stop me.
Now, there's a saying that all seizures are not necessarily epilepsy. Now, to get more enlightened on epilepsy and non-epileptic seizures in children, we still have with us Professor Girish Moody. Professor Moody is a specialist neurologist and head of neurology department at Wits University. Now, Prof, let's just take, before we start, on the children, let's just get back to what we're discussing now, the causes and the triggers. You mentioned, developmental and the risk and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one would say that in the generalized group, you're not going to find a cause.
Yeah.
So those are what we call idiopathic. So it's a doctor term. When we don't know what's happening,
the idiots don't know the pathology.
That's right. The idiots don't know the pathology.
Yeah.
So we call it idiopathic, and that's usually in the generalized form. In the partial forms, we often find pathology.
Right.
So when I spoke of developmental, there's that what we call a mesial sclerosis, like a scar in your temporal lobe that occurs as a result of development. We know that's important to identify in those patients who have what we call temporal lobe epilepsy. Then there are other developmental problems where there are migration disorders. So as the brain is formed in the mother's womb, it's quite interesting, your first 12 weeks, it's all done. So any insult during that 12 weeks will result in a problem.
What sort of insult?
Alcohol, drugs, whatever, infections, anything, trauma, things like that. But the big ones are usually the toxins, alcohol, is a bad one.
Yeah.
And so the development of the brain goes a bit off. And so that can be a cause for the epilepsy. So those are the developmental things I talked about. The genetic things, you won't find anything. That's more in the generalized forms. And then you talk of trauma, head injuries in child, concussions, any of those things, tumors,
and trauma
strokes,
can be both a risk and a trigger as well.
And a trigger, exactly.
Right.
And then, as I was talking about, especially in our side of the world, infections, tapeworm infestation is a huge thing, what we call cysticercosis. And in fact, in South America, India, and in South Africa, and in the Eastern Cape especially, we have a huge burden of cysticercosis. And so you see these eggs of the tapeworms in the brain, and they're triggering the seizures. So we would say that where there's a cause that's identified, you're probably going to have those partial epilepsies. Where there's no cause where the idiot pathology is, then we have the generalized epilepsy.
Okay.
In terms of triggers, these are important. Fevers in children are a big thing. So when your child is having a fever, it doesn't mean if the child convulses that's epilepsy, but it can trigger a seizure.
Right.
So you've got to attack that fever.
But let's clear that now. Just now you're saying a child would carry that risk, going forward. And fever is a trigger for what now? I mean, would you say
for a seizure?
For a seizure, generally, yeah.
But what I'm saying is a child without that risk
could
have a fever and have a convulsion.
Right.
But that's a febrile convulsion. That is not epilepsy.
But that's quite common.
That's common. That's very common.
I think it's important for parents watching. Seeing their child having these seizures,
frightening,
and of course it's frightening, and so we'll come back to what they should do. But what you're saying is it's not necessarily epilepsy.
Absolutely not. And in fact, febrile convulsions, while we're on the topic, will occur between the ages of 1 and 5.
Right.
So any fever where the temperature goes above 39 has the potential to trigger a convulsion. Now that child does not necessarily, and this is important for them to know, have epilepsy or will develop epilepsy. On the other way of looking at it, there may be a child with a risk in whom the fever triggers it.
Right.
Okay. So that's why when you're defining epilepsy, the definition is clear. 2 or more seizures where there is no recognized trigger or stimulus.
Yeah.
Right.
But the responsible thing, I guess, for the
always
parents
check
is
it out. Always check it out.
Take the child to hospital.
Absolutely.
All right, to be confirmed.
No harm in checking things out.
All right. Okay. Now let's stick on children now.
Yeah.
What is the natural cause of the disease?
Okay.
Epilepsy?
So again, it depends on whether you're dealing with the generalized forms or the partial forms. If you have a generalized epilepsy where there is no cause, where you fall down without warning, you can have any of those bad ones. You can have the stiff one, the tonic, the clonic, the tonic-clonic, the myoclonic, whatever, right? The prognosis is generally good, right? You do need treatment, and the general guideline is that for 2 years you're going to need treatment. And then you have a 60 to 70% chance of killing that epilepsy. And you can go on so-called cured for the rest of your life.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, some people talk about children outgrowing
Exactly.
epilepsy.
That's exactly it.
Right.
You're outgrowing. But the chances of outgrowing it without treatment are much less than with treatment. So treatment impacts on the natural history. So it's important.
Right.
Right. So that's the generalized forms. The partial forms, they go on. So a child with temporal lobe epilepsy will continue to have it, but you can control them very well with medication.
Yeah. In my introduction, I mentioned brain damage.
Yeah.
Let's just clear that.
Okay.
Can epilepsy result in brain damage?
Only
in a child?
one situation.
Right.
What we call the status epilepsy.
Yeah.
Status where from one fit you move straight away into another. No recovery period.
Yeah.
So if you're having a fit or a seizure and you recover from it, you can have another one a couple of hours later, right? But it doesn't cause brain damage. Okay. That's been proven and confirmed. Yeah. It's when you go from one seizure without recovering into another.
Yeah.
And if that status goes on for more than 12 hours, there's a risk of brain damage. That's the only situation.
So it'll be fairly okay for a child, for instance, to have 3-4 seizures in a day, and that you're saying will not affect
as long as you're
the child.
recovering from each one.
Right.
So you get back to normal,
Yeah.
and then you can have another one later.
Yeah.
Then there's no risk of brain damage.
And in terms of, normal functioning at school, it shouldn't affect.
Totally normal functioning.
Yeah.
Of course, if you're looking again, the partial ones where there's an underlying cause, that cause may be the reason for the poor performance in school,
Right.
not the epilepsy.
Right. All right.
Or sometimes the medicines are a cause for the poor performance
Yes,
in school.
absolutely,
You have to tailor the medicines to the child.
Very interesting. All right. So after the break, folk, we chat to someone living with epilepsy. Please stay with us for this.
Your World makes it its business every evening to round up the leading local stories and international news to keep you informed all the time.
Make a date with Your World every evening for all the news headlines around the world to keep you abreast with knowledge.
Catch Your World for headlines across the world every Monday to Friday from 9 p.m, then Saturday and Sunday from 7 p.m.
Some people used to tease me, but they don't do that anymore because they kind of get, oh, well, if he has seizures, what if I had them? I wouldn't like it.
There's no need to bully them or say silly comments about them because they're the same as us and it's just having a seizure and they can't help that. So it would help if you wouldn't bully them because it would make their life better.
In school, the kids don't tease me about my epilepsy, but outside school, some people just think it's funny that they've got a disability when it's not. But then they tease you about they shake and say, haha, this is what happens to you and all that.
You don't need to be nasty. You don't need to be a bully. Just need to be a friend.
If I had to say anything to a new teacher that I had, that'd be that it's not different to me. It's just the same. I may have seizures, but I do keep up with my work and I will come back to class sooner or later. If not today or tomorrow, I will come back sometime. And that not to worry that I'm not different to others and I don't have to be cared for in a different way.
I want people to know epilepsy isn't a disability. It's just treat them like a normal person, really. And don't be mean to them just because they've got epilepsy. It doesn't really matter. It's just like them being a normal person.
Do not be shy. Do not cry. Be brave. I have epilepsy. Well, if you have epilepsy, you're my friend, and friends look after each other.
Friends do look after each other indeed. So one of the commonest questions asked about epilepsy is whether or not people living with this condition can lead normal lives. How does the condition affect family life, for instance, relationships, school, work, sports, or recreation? Well, let's understand that a bit more from someone living with epilepsy. In fact, we have two special guests. First up is Angeline Tsapetsi. Angeline is a person living with epilepsy, and she's going to share with us a personal story. And with her is Mr. Candace Kandawire, who is Assistant Director at Epilepsy South Africa and is a social worker by profession. Angie, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you, Doc, for inviting us.
All right, let's start with you, Angie. Tell us your story. You have written a book, I see, if I can just put it up so that the camera can actually zoom into it a little bit. And this is an autobiography about yourself.
Yes, sir.
If not me, then who? All right, tell us about yourself.
My name is Angeline Tsapetsi. Yes, I'm from Vereniging in Sebokeng. I was diagnosed with epilepsy in 1998 while I was still in high school, 15 years of age. And I suffered with seizures for 12 years of my life, but so far I'm still on medication, and I'm glad and happy to say that the seizures have stopped. Yes.
So tell us about when it started now. You say you were at high school at the time.
At high school at the time.
What actually happened the first time you had seizures?
The first time it happened at home, actually. It was at night, I remember correctly, because Bafana was playing, so...
then it must have been a very bad match, eh?
It was a good match because we were winning back then.
Okay.
So as a celebration, we went outside as children, excited as we were, running around. But then actually I fell. So my parents took it lightly back then. They just thought that it was just an excitement, and they didn't make anything out of it.
Did you lose consciousness? Do you remember actually what happened?
I lost consciousness, yes, sir. Until it happened again the second time at school, and one of my teachers brought me, it was a family friend as well, she brought me home. Then that's when my parents raised ears to say that I need to be checked.
So that's when you went to consult a doctor?
Yes.
Were you put on medication?
I was put on medication, but the doctor did not confirm that it was epilepsy. It was epilepsy because it was not a specialist that I went to. It was just a general practitioner.
Right.
Yes.
So when was it confirmed that it was epilepsy?
It was confirmed in around 2006. Mm-hmm. Yes, but back then again, I was still having seizures, although I was still on medication.
Okay, we'll get back to you now because I want to understand just how this whole epilepsy thing has affected you personally and your life and your relationships and everything. But let's just invite Candace Kandawire. Mr. Kandawire, yes, perhaps at this stage, just tell us about Epilepsy South Africa. What do you do?
As Epilepsy South Africa, Doc, we are involved in counseling, and we provide information around epilepsy to the community, to the public. We go to radio stations, to TV stations to raise awareness around the issues of epilepsy. We also go to schools, to talk to educators, we talk to learners so that they've got an understanding of what epilepsy is all about, so that they can assist. If there is a learner who has epilepsy within the classroom setup.
Right. The clip we showed, at the beginning of the segment had a lot to do with stigma. Do you see that as a major problem in our societies?
Yes, Doc. Stigma is very, very critical when it comes to people with epilepsy, because people have, misinformation or misconceptions and lack of information around epilepsy. So there's a stigma attached to the condition. There's stigma attached to a person living with epilepsy. In some other instances, you'll find that a parent would not want his child to play with a child with epilepsy because there's this misunderstanding or misconception that the other child will be contaminated. Or they have this understanding, which is a myth, that epilepsy is contagious, which is not the case. So the stigma plays a critical role. We are trying as Epilepsy South Africa and as community social workers to go out in the community to demystify the stigma attached to the condition and to people with epilepsy.
And I see that you produce a magazine. How often do you produce this magazine?
The magazine is produced biannually.
Yeah.
And the contents of the magazine, these are the practical stories written by people with epilepsy to share their experiences, their challenges, and their challenges. Like Angie has indicated that epilepsy was not a barrier for her to live a normal life.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to her, Angie.
Yes, sir.
How did epilepsy, from school, from high school, did it have any effect at all?
Luckily from school, no, it did not have that much effect on me. Just only at home, because back then my mother, of course, she was protecting me, I understand. She did not allow me anywhere near the stove to cook or anything like that in case I would burn myself. And as well, the barrier again with me was thinking that, as Mr. Candace is saying, with stigmatizing and everything like that, that will I ever be able to drive a car as a person living with epilepsy? I thought that that was not possible, that it would never happen.
Okay, just hold it there, because we have Lerato on the line from Isando. Lerato, good morning and welcome to Health Talk.
Yes, I'm actually calling, doctor, about the medication of epilepsy.
Yeah.
You find that medication is actually quite expensive. You go and buy. I get some of the medication from Charlotte Makake, and some of the medication gets bought from the pharmacy. You go and buy it like 700 rands. And some of the medication I have to go and buy from the medication is like 700 rand, and I'm unemployed, which is not, it's unlike the ARV where it's subsidized, which is not, it's not very well. I'm not very, very happy about that.
Okay.
It's not very well. I that it's actually not very well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lerato. You know, fortunately, we have Professor Modi still with us. Perhaps you'd like to respond, Prof. Modi?
The question of cost.
That's right, and availability of medication.
Cost and availability. Okay, so cost is an issue that we haven't got any control over. It's a pharmaceutical issue. Now, fortunately, we do have generics. People need to understand that there are subtle differences between the original or the ethical product and the generic product. But these differences do not impact on their benefits.
All right. I'll tell you what, let's just hold it here, because in the next segment we're going to be talking treatment, and we'll go a lot more into detail. And Lerato, perhaps if you could, stay tuned, you'll get the, response further expatiated upon. Back to you.
Yes, sir.
What motivated you to write this book?
I wanted to give inspiration to the people who are living with epilepsy, and to show them that there is more to living than if you are suffering from epilepsy, that life doesn't end there, that you can still reach your dreams and do everything and anything that you want to do with your life.
Did you see epilepsy as a challenge to you personally? I mean, just now you mentioned, you had a problem at home. You weren't allowed to be next to the stove. Did you feel a bit restricted in that way?
At first, yes, I used to, because I used to hate the epilepsy with everything, every fiber of my being. I wouldn't even bring myself to mention words such as eclipse, economy, education, and such, because somewhere in my mind there was something that, should I mention anything with the letter E, it would trigger the epilepsy. So I was I used to bow down to the condition. So that's how fearful I was.
And
of
you've
the condition.
overcome all of these challenges.
I have
now.
overcome it, because I've accepted my condition, and it doesn't behold me anymore.
Well, Angeline Tsapetsi, person with living with epilepsy, thank you so much for your time, and continue the good work that you're doing out there.
Thank you very much, Dr.
All right, now, so how difficult is it to manage epilepsy? That and more after the break. Please stay with us.
Preparing for victory requires intense effort and teamwork. When you get to it, there is no turning back, because all eyes are on you. When it's action time, nothing should stand in your way. Sports Live tackles and analyzes all the sport action. This is the home of all your sport news, updates, and more. Sports Live weekdays at 8:30 p.m.
Get all the latest news from the SABC's online news services on our website. Breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
Of people with epilepsy can be seizure-free with adequate treatment.
Well, for my medication, one of the side effects may be just that I'm tired, or that could be me, whichever one. The only thing bad about them is, like all medication, they just taste bad and they're helping, so there's nothing different about taking medication.
They don't come in flavours, they have this bleh.
It does help me a fair bit, because I used to have about 20 seizures a day. But now I only have about 8, and medication helps a lot, even though it doesn't change my lifestyle.
Since I've been on the medicine, I've probably only had 2-3 eye flickers, which is pretty good.
When someone has a seizure, the best thing to do is to help them to the ground and then to protect them from injuring their head or any part of their body. The seizure itself isn't in the muscles of the body, so holding the muscles of the body won't help to stop the seizure, because the seizure will continue as the electrical discharge in the brain.
Epilepsy can be treated. Epilepsy can be defeated.
So how exactly can epilepsy be treated and defeated? Let's find out from our special guest. We still have Professor Girish Modi, specialist neurologist and head of neurology at Wits University. And we still have Candace Kandawira, assistant director at Epilepsy South Africa. But before we get into treatment, I believe we have a caller on the line, Thandagazi from King Williamstown. Thandagazi, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Your question or comment, please.
Yes, I'm so much interested in the epileptic and non-epileptic seizures.
Right.
Because my daughter currently, she's in hospital. She's been going in and out of hospital, but now the doctor is saying, no, it's more of the non-epileptic seizure.
Right. How old is your child?
she's now 24.
24.
She had an operation when she was about 5 years old.
What operation?
A cyst was removed on the head.
Ah, I see. Okay.
But then they said maybe she might develop seizures. So at about the age of 13, the seizures started.
All right. Thank you, Ndagazi. Let's see if the Prof can help. Jonah, perhaps ask her any questions?
No.
Okay.
Non-epileptic seizures are basically what we used to say pseudo seizures. So they look like seizures, they're a manifestation of seizures as we know, but when we check them, they don't have that electrical storm in the brain. So there are other processes that are underlying the non-epileptic seizures. There may be psychological issues, there may be other issues related to that.
Interesting that she says a cyst was removed from her. Possibly cysticercosis.
But remember, it sounds like cysticercosis.
Right.
King Williamstown is Eastern Cape. I'm sure it was cysticercosis.
Yeah. Maybe just take us through, very quickly in a minute, what that is. Yeah.
What cysts?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens with tapeworm is you ingest measly meat or pork, usually pork, but infected pork, but you can also get it from salads where the tapeworm eggs are sitting. So when you ingest the eggs of the tapeworm, they become a worm in your stomach. Those worms then pass out the eggs again in your feces, and it's about cleanliness. So you then reinfest yourself, and when you reinfect yourself, those cysts migrate liver, muscles, and brain.
Okay.
And when they get into the brain, they evoke an inflammatory reaction which triggers the seizures. So you can get live cysts and you can get dead cysts. They do die, but when they die, they become stones, and those stones become little triggers for seizures.
Yeah, well, this takes us then to treatment of epilepsy.
Epilepsy.
Okay, before we get to treating the cause.
So the first thing, all forms of treatment start with the diagnosis, always confirm it. The tools we have for diagnosis are the EEG or electroencephalogram. All patients with epilepsy in the year 2016 must have a brain scan, whether it's a CAT scan or an MRI scan, depending on what is needed. And once you've confirmed this diagnosis, you've excluded treatable causes like the cysticercosis, head injuries, whatever, tumors, anything. Once you've identified the problem properly, then you start your treatment process.
Yeah.
Treatment is medication.
Right.
So medication will stop seizures, as we said, can kill seizures, defeat seizures, at least in 70% of patients, completely. Right. Then there's about lifestyle, and this is where the education comes.
Right. Before we get to lifestyle, what is the goal of therapy then?
Goal of therapy, zero seizures.
Well, you often hear stories about, these, as we played in these clips, this kid who says, well, I used to have about 20 seizures a day. Now they've come down to about 8. And anybody watching this thinking 8 seizures a day, that's not acceptable.
8 petty miles might be fine, but 8 seizures that we talked about, I would say no. I would say that your goal must be to be seizure-free.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're failing as a doctor.
All right. Let's take a last caller on the line. Sorry to interrupt. Hecunus from Bedford View. Yes. Welcome to Health Talking. Hecunus, are you with us?
Yes.
Yeah, your question of view.
I would like to ask the professor.
Yes.
I became epileptic at 70 years old.
Right.
Is that normal or what?
Okay, thank you very much for the question.
Happens. It's called late onset epilepsy.
Yeah.
Again, it's part of that process I talked about. You're born with a risk. You take it to age 70, little strokes in the brain, they trigger it.
I see. Okay. So in terms of now monitoring treatment, you said that the idea is to have 0 seizures a day. Very quickly, Candace, what support do you give to those people living with epilepsy on treatment?
Doc, it is important that people with epilepsy should have a support system. Like Angie indicated earlier on, that she had support, from the family. In the community out there, we go to clinics, we go to hospitals to identify people with epilepsy, obviously with the collaboration and assistance of the medical staff. When we meet with people with epilepsy, we encourage them to be part of our support groups. Within a support group, it is where people with epilepsy, they feel that they are treated like human beings. And beyond the support group, we also have, home visits. We go to families and to educate families around the issues of epilepsy so that they can understand what is happening to their family members. So support systems are very, very important for people with epilepsy.
Any place for surgery in the treatment?
Small role.
Yeah.
In those with a bad developmental problem and in those with the seizures that we just can't fix with medicines. A small percentage. Do not rush to surgery. Okay. Avoid having your brain opened up unless it's absolutely necessary.
All right. Well, gentlemen, it's been such a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure the public out there has learned as much as I have. Thank you very much for your contribution, Prof. Girish Moody, Head of Neurology at Wits University, and Candace Kandawire, Assistant Director at Epilepsy South Africa. Well, folks, it's on that note that we come to the end of our show today. Join us again next week on SABC News. And please just share your views and comments with us on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Now, you can watch the repeat of today's and all other previous shows from our SABC YouTube link. Just simply Google Health Talk and SABC Health Talk. I'm Dr. Selim Mustahou, and thank you so much for watching Health Talk, and please do take care.